Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, good night. Depending on where you are in this world, God bless you. Now we're going to continue in Halley's Bible Handbook, and we are reading Revelation. Now I want to show you two pictures here. The top one is on the coast of Asia Minor. It's the standing pillars of the ancient forum, and below is a view over the city of Smyrna. There's the pillars, and then that's the city. Pretty interesting when you can, because we read the Bible and we have no idea what these places look like unless you've been there, you know. So, having never been there, seeing these pictures helps me visualize, what it looked like there. Okay, now we're going to read about Pergamum. Pergamos was a city of Mysia in the Caicus Valley, 15 miles inland. In the King James Version, Pergamos, and that's royally situated in a commanding position. Pergamum was a capital until the last of the Pergamenian kings bequeathed his realm to Rome in 133 BC. Pergamum became the chief town of the new province of Asia and the site of the first temple of the Caesar cult, erected to Rome and Augustus in 29 BC. A second shrine was later dedicated to Trajan, and the multiplication of such honor marks the prestige of the Pergamum in pagan Asia. The worship of Asclepios and Zeus were also endemic. The symbol of the former was a serpent, and Pausanias describes his cult image with a staff in one hand and the other on the head of a serpent. Pergamenium coins illustrate the importance which the community attached to this cult. Caracalla is shown on one coin, saluting a serpent twined around a bending sapling. On the crag above Pergamum was a throne-like altar to Zeus, now in the Berlin Museum, and that's Revelation 2:13. It is commemorated a defeat of a Gallic inroad and was decorated with a representation of the conflict of the gods and the giants, the latter shown as monsters with snake-like tails. Zeus, to deepen Christian horror at Pergamum's obsession with the serpent image, was called in this connection Zeus the Savior. It is natural that Nicotolaitanism, that's the Nicotolaitans that Jesus hated, should flourish in a place where politics and paganism were so closely allied, and where pressure on Christians to compromise must have been heavy. Pergamum was an ancient seat of culture and possessed a library which rivaled Alexandria's. Parchment, or Charta Pergamena, was invented at Pergamum to free the library from Egypt's jealous ban on the export of papyrus. And that's papyrus, the paper that they wrote on. Now, this Nicotolaitism was when they professed to be Christians and were in the Christian church, but were teaching that it was okay to worship false idols, was okay to eat meat sacrificed to idols, was okay to have to perform sexual immorality. And that's why Jesus hated what they were teaching when they were teaching what the Nicolaitans believed. Now then, Thyratira was a city in the province of Asia, on the boundary of Lydia and Mysia. Thyatira has no illustrious history and is scarcely mentioned by ancient writers. Coinage suggests that, lying as it did on a great highway linking two river valleys, Thyatira was a garrison town over long centuries. Its ancient Anatolian deity was an odd coin. Oh, no, sorry, skipped a line. Its ancient Anatolian deity was a warlike figure armed with a battle axe and mounted on a charger. An odd coin or two shows a female deity wearing a battlemented crown. The city was the center of commerce, and the records preserve references to more trade guilds than those listed for any other Asian city. Lydia, whom Paul met in Philippi, was a Thyatirian seller of Turkey red, the product of the madder root, in Acts 16:14. It is curious to find another woman nicknamed after the princess who sealed Ahab's trading partner with the Phoenicians, leading a party of compromise in the Thyatirian church. Revelation 2, verses 20 and 21. Necessity for guild membership in a trading community must have strengthened temptation to compromise. Thyatira played no significant part in the latter history of the church. Sardis was the chief city of Lydia, under a fortified spur of Mount Tmolus in the Hermus Valley, near the junction of the roads from Central Asia Minor, Ephesus, Smyrna, and Pergamum. Capital of Lydia was Croesus, Croesus, and seat of the governor after the Persian conquest. Sardis was famous for arts and crafts, and was the first center to mint gold and silver coinage. So wealthy were the Lydian kings that Croesus became a legend for riches, and it was said that the sands of Pactolus were golden. Croesus also became a legend for pride and presumptuous arrogance, when his attack on Persia led the fall of Sardis and the eclipse of his kingdom. The capture of the great citadel by surprise attack by Cyrus and his Persians in 549 BC, and 3 centuries later by the Romans, may have provided the imagery for John's warning in Revelation 3:3. The great earthquake of AD 17 ruined Sardis physically and financially. The Romans contributed 10 million sesterces in relief, an indication of the damage done, but the city never recovered. Philadelphia was a Lydian city founded by Attalus II, Philadelphus, in 159 to 138 BC. The king was so named from his devotion to his brother Eumenes, and the city perpetuated his title. Philadelphia was an outpost of the Hellenism in native Anatolia. It lies under Mount Tmolus in a wide vale which opens into the Hermus Valley and along which the post road ran. It is on a broad, low, easy defended hill which explains Philadelphia's long stand against the Turks. The district is disastrously seismic, and the great earthquake of 1817 ruined it completely. Placed right above the fault, Philadelphia was tormented by 20 years of recurrent quakes after the disaster of 17. Hence, says Ramsey, is derived the imagery of Revelation 3:12, a pillar, go no more out, a new name. The new name is certainly a reference to the proposal to rename the city Neocaesarea in gratitude for Tiberius's generous earthquake relief. The district was vine growing and a center in consequence of Dionysiac, Dion, Ysiac, worship. Pronunciation of words I do not know is not my strong suit. So my apologies. Doing the best I know how. A Christian witness, in spite of Muslim invasion and pressure, was maintained in Philadelphia through medieval and into modern times. Laodicea was a wealthy city in Asia Minor, founded by Antioch II in 261 to 246 BC, and the head of the circuit of the 7 churches of Asia. The city lay on one of the great Asia trade routes, and this ensured its great commercial prosperity. Laodicea was a leading banking center. In 51 BC, Cicero, en route for his Sicilian province, cashed drafts there. It was no doubt the rich banking firms which, in AD 60, financed the reconstruction of the city after the great earthquake which prostrated it. Laodicea refused the Senate's earthquake relief. She was rich and increased with goods and had need of nothing, in Revelation 3:17. The Lycus Valley produced a glossy black wool and source of black cloaks and carpets, for which the city was famous. Laodicea was also the home of a medical school and the manufacturer of collyrium, a famous eye salve. The scornful imagery of the apocalyptic letter to Laodicea is obviously based on these activities. It also has reference to the emetic qualities of the soda-laden warm water from nearby Hierapolis, whose thermal springs ran into the meander. Laodicea's water supply also came from Hierapolis, and Sir William Ramsay suggests that its vulnerability, together with the city's exposed position and its easy wealth, caused the growth of the community of that spirit of compromise and worldly mindedness castigated in the Revelation. Under Diocletian, Laodicea, still prosperous, was made the chief city at the province of Phrygia. The Zondervan Pictorial Bible Dictionary. The 7 letters follow the same pattern, beginning, "These things saith he, And I know thy works. Closing. He that overcometh. He that hath an ear, let him hear. These things saith he. Naming the aspect of his nature pertinent to each church. To Ephesus, a great and powerful church, but losing zeal. These things saith he that holdeth 7 stars in his hand. To Smyrna, a poor, suffering church, facing martyrdom. These things saith he that was dead and lived again. To Pergamum, tolerating teachers of immorality. These things saith he that hath the sharp 2-edged sword. To Thyratira, growing in zeal, but tolerating Jezebel. These things saith the Son of God, who hath eyes like fire. To Sardis, with a name that it lived, but was dead. These things saith he that hath the 7 spirits of God. To Philadelphia, a nobody in the city, but faithful. These things saith he that openeth, and none shut. To Laodicea, the lukewarm church. These things saith the faithful and true witness. Then it says, I know thy works. To Ephesus, I know thy works, thy labor and patience. To Smyrna, I know thy works in tribulation and poverty. To Pergamum, I know where thou dwellest, where Satan's throne is. To Thyratira, I know thy works, thy love and faith and patience. To Sardis, I know thy works, a name thou livest, and art dead. To Philadelphia, I know thy works, that thou hast kept my word. To Laodicea, I know thy works, neither hot nor cold. To him that overcometh. In Ephesus, he that overcometh, eat of tree of life. In Smyrna, he that overcometh, not hurt of second death. In Pergamum, he that overcometh, to eat of hidden manna. To Thyatira, he that overcometh, will I give morning star. In Sardis, he that overcometh, not blot name from book of life. In Philadelphia, he that overcometh, pillar and temple of God. In Laodicea, he that overcometh, to sit with me in my throne. He that hath an ear, let him hear. Thus closes each letter, as if the Lord was warning the churches that they had better take seriously what he was saying to them. And what he was saying to those churches, we should be applying to our lives and our churches today. That what we find is dying, we need to turn back to our first love and bring it back to life. And the things that we're getting drawn away into, we need to get it out of our sight. And any Jezebels, we need to, and no teachings of the Nicotolaitans. It's not okay to have false idols and to eat things sacrificed to idols. We have to be careful. It's important to read those letters that John wrote, that Jesus said, write to these churches and tell them these things, that they can correct their problems. That he that hath an ear, let him hear. Okay, chapter 2, verses 1 through 7, the letter to Ephesus. Ephesus, mother of Asia churches, a city of 225,000 population, was a metropolis and commercial center of Asia. Its temple of Diana was one of the 7 wonders of the world. There, 40 years before, Paul had done his most successful work in AD 54 to 57. Such a multitude of converts to Christ that almost overnight the church became one of the most powerful influences in the city, and soon one of the most famous churches in the world. After the death of Paul, Timothy, it is said, spent most of his time in Ephesus, and there suffered martyrdom under Domitian, same persecution that sent John to Patmos. In Ephesus, John spent his old age, and if not an active pastor on account of his age, as last surviving apostle of Christ, he must have been a dominating influence among pastors. In a sense, it was John's own church. There, John wrote his gospel, 3 epistles, and Revelation. 3 of Paul's epistles related to Ephesus, Ephesians, and 1st and 2nd Timothy. And in that region, it is thought, possibly the 2 epistles of Peter and that of Jude were first issued. Ephesus, about halfway between Jerusalem and Rome, was the approximate geographic center of the Roman Empire, and it had, in John's own lifetime, become the approximate geographic and numerical center of the Christian population of the world. About 10 years after the death of John, the Emperor Trajan sent Pliny, Pliny, into the Asia region to investigate whether to persecute Christians. Pliny wrote back to Trajan that Christians had become so numerous that heathen temples were almost deserted. Christian churches in many cities of the region included large and influential elements of the population, with Ephesus as the queen church of them all. It had been 66 years since Pentecost, birthday of the church, at Jerusalem. The church everywhere had made phenomenal growth, but signs of corruption were beginning to appear, and that, we think, is one of the things that call forth the book of Revelation. The Church of Ephesus, chapter 2, verse 1. It was before the days of church buildings. They had to meet in halls and homes, or wherever they could. Not one great central temple, but many, perhaps hundreds, of small congregations, each under its own pastoral leadership. Yet the letter is addressed to the church in Ephesus. Hundreds of congregations, yet one church. I want to point this out to you, and I want you to make a mental note that there were hundreds of churches, but they were individual small churches meeting in homes. And this may become what is necessary in order to have continued Christian fellowship in the near future. And here, he that holdeth the 7 stars in his hand, in chapter 2, verse 1. Emblem of his power, perhaps intended as a suggestive warning that the church was becoming too proud of its prestige, glorying in what was of little use to its real mission. And I'll keep going a little bit more. The false apostles in chapter 2, verse 2. These evidently were men who claimed to have known Christ, with authority from him for their teaching, in their effort to harmonize the immoral indulgences of idol worship with the Christian faith. Remember when they said they tested them and found them to be liars? The Nicolaitans in chapter 2, verse 6, it is thought, were a sect who had advocated lasciviousness as the proper way of life. These false teachers had caused great trouble in the church. The Ephesian pastors, as a body, it seems, had stood patiently and solidly against their teaching, for which they were commended in chapter 2, verse 2 and 3. Now, we have to be aware of false teachers and false prophets. Jesus told us to take heed and let no man deceive us into doing these types of things in our churches. It wasn't right then, and it would not be right now. It won't be right in the future. Fallen from their first love. And that's chapter 2, verses 4 and 5. This was their offense. Their zeal for Christ was cooling off. They no longer loved him as they once did. They were becoming indifferent, half-hearted, not yet lukewarm, like the Laodicean church in chapter 3, verse 16, but headed in that direction. This hurt Christ, for it they received a stinging rebuke and were warned to repent in chapter 2, verse 5, else their candlestick would be removed. It has. The site of Ephesus is deserted. And that was at one time the main church, like the head. And now, because they turned away and became lukewarm, it disappeared. That's the danger of becoming lukewarm. Take note of this. Don't let yourself become lukewarm to Christ. Stay on fire for the Lord. The tree of life in chapter 2, verse 7. Promise to those who overcome allurements of false teaching and natural temptations to fleshly indulgence and worldly ease. While the Ephesian church, as a church, has perished, the promise of the tree of life still holds good to individuals in any church who overcome. Now we know here these false teaching and natural temptations to fleshly indulgence and worldly ease. Now this fleshly indulgence, this is Satan. This is a warning against Satan right here, because he wants to attack our flesh. He wants to use our flesh against our spirits. Because if he can tempt our bodies, our flesh, into sexual sin, then he wins. If he can cause us to indulge in alcohol or smoking or drugs or eating too much, if he can draw us into sexual immorality of the flesh, he wins. But this is what Christ is warning us. Don't get drawn up into those fleshly indulgences. Fleshly indulgence and worldly ease. Don't get lazy. So watch out with all those programs that the government's saying, oh, we'll pay for this and we'll pay for that and we'll pay you this and we'll pay you that. Be careful. It's a very slippery slope. Okay, archaeology and Ephesus. Ephesus was excavated by J.T. Wood in 1869 to 1874. British Museum in 1904 to 1905, and the Austrian expedition in 1894 and 1930. Ruins of the Temple of Diana were uncovered. Also ruins of the theater in which the great riot was held in Acts 19:20, verse 29. Also, they found remains of a Roman bath constructed of marble with many rooms, steam rooms, cold rooms, lounge rooms, and evidence of the luxury of the city. They also found a temple which contained a statue of Domitian, the emperor, who called himself God, who is now dead, who had banished John to the Isle of Patmos, and who was persecuting Christians while these visions of the book of Revelation, were being given to John. And we're going to stop there because we're at 30 minutes, and I don't want to overwhelm you guys with too much information at once, because I want you to listen and learn and to, enrich yourself with more information concerning the things that happen in the Bible and the things that we know happened, because it's telling us here that, these are details that we're not getting out of the Bible itself, but this is giving us that information. And here I'm going to show you, it's the Acropolis at Pergamum. And this is a Radio Times Holton Picture Library in the BBC in London. I think it's interesting to see these pictures. I'm sure that somewhere there are color photographs of things, but they're probably later, in time than these, which were earlier. So we'll pick up on the Tree of Life. No, it'll be archaeology in Ephesus when we come back. So I hope you guys are enjoying this and getting something from it. I'm enjoying it. I apologize again for my pronunciation. Words that I'm not familiar with. Boy, I'll tell you, it would be the death of all the children in the world to learn how to read if they had to depend on me to give them phonics lessons. Nobody would ever read again. And as always, I love you.